Hey there, drone fans. Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I'd like to explain how I broke my brand new Mavic 2 Zoom so you don't make the same mistake I made. Then I'll explain how I fixed it. Now, before I get too deep into the clip, let me just say it was 100% my fault. All right, maybe not all my fault. It was 98% my fault, maybe 2% DJI's fault, and I'll cover that at the end of the clip. But let me set the stage for how all this started. We were heading to a family party at the shore last weekend, and at the last minute I thought to myself, why don't I grab my quad and take it with me, just on the off chance I can sneak away from the party, put the quad up and capture some beautiful footage down there at the shore. That's easily my most favorite place to fly, where I've got salt air and seagulls and beautiful scenery, so I was really hoping I could sneak away and actually put the quad up and fly it. So I ran back inside, I grabbed my Mavic 2 Zoom, grabbed the controller, put him in the back of the car, and we drove down to the party. So about midway through the party, I saw my chance for a break. So I snuck out of there like a ninja, got to the car, drove down to the shore, pulled out the quad, and realized, uh-oh, I grabbed the Mavic 2 Pro. And I had a Mavic 2 Zoom controller. So I thought, well, I'm not going to let that spoil a day. I'm putting the Pro up. All I'll do is rebind the Mavic 2 Zoom with the Pro. No big deal. And now, if you guys haven't done that before, it's really easy to do. You can put this guy into binding mode a couple of different ways. You can do it through the application, or you can push these two buttons at the same time while holding this button. It'll beep. Then you hit this button. So you're basically holding four buttons, and you'll see binding come up on the remote controller. Once that happens, you open up this little door on the bottom here, and you'll see a little, and I'll do a blow up of this, you'll see a little black button in there. You tap that button, the light will blink red here. That means it's in binding mode. Really, 5 seconds later, they're bound and you're good to go. So that's exactly what I did. I then flew the drone for, I don't know, an hour and a half. I went through like 5 batteries, just had a wonderful time down there at the shore. When I was out of batteries, I packed everything up, went back to the party. So everything's okay so far. I got home the next day and I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to forget that I actually bound that remote to this one, and I'm going to be confused later when I go out there to use it. So why don't I set everything up and straighten it out? So I took the remote, I broke out the Mavic 2 Zoom, I put it in binding mode, I went to this guy, and here's where I made the mistake. Instead of using my finger, like a normal person would do, I'm used to resetting electronics with a paper clip. So I grabbed a pen, pushed in on that button, and it wouldn't go into binding mode. And I didn't see the red light come on, and I'm like, well, that's really odd. Did I do something wrong? Powered it down, same thing, same results. Put a new battery in it, same thing, same results. I reset the remote, no joy. So basically, no matter what I did with that button, I could not put this into binding mode. So being the nerd I am, I could either just put it in a box and send it back to DJI and beg them to fix it. And I thought, nope, you know what? I'm tearing open the box. It's not that big a deal. So I'll show you a couple of close-ups of how you do this. I don't recommend you do this unless you absolutely have to, but I love taking stuff apart, and I've been deeper into this thing that I'm going to actually show you today. But let's just talk about what I did today. So the first thing you've got to do to get at that button is you've got to pull this cowl off on the front. Now, I used a Torx wrench on this. I think it's a 0.5. These two screws will come out and this cowl pops off. It's just a piece of plastic. But the reason it has to come off is because underneath that, two of the screws that hold this bottom plate on are blocked. So what you'll do is take off the cowl first, gently take off these two screws, and pop out these two edges here. And I'll show you a close-up of what that looks like. Once that cowl is off the actual bottom, you'll see there are 6 screws. There's 2 up front, 1 here, 2 here, and 2 here in the back. If you pull those out, this whole bottom plate becomes loose. You can pull that bottom plate off. Now, when you do, you'll see there's a cable from the actual board that's on the bottom to the main printed circuit board. So you'll have to just gently with a fingernail pop that up, and that connector comes off, and you'll be holding this bottom piece. Now, interestingly, on the Mavic Pro, that bottom piece was a heatsink, so it was metal. Actually, it had ribs in it to sort of eliminate a lot of the heat that was underneath there. This is just plastic. There's no heatsink involved in it at all. Anyway, when you get that off and you look at it closely, you'll see there are 6 tiny little Phillips head screws. So you need a really, really small Phillips head. But if you take those screws out and flip over the board, you'll see the button on the one side. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So when I examined that board and looked at it very closely, you can see from the photo I'm showing you now that that switch was actually broken off the printed circuit board. Now, luckily, I didn't really rough it up. I'm telling you, I didn't get in there with a cold chisel and bang on it with a hammer. All I did was hit it with the tip of a pen to basically push it in gently to reset it, because I couldn't really see the button, so I hit it with a pen. The fact that that switch popped off the board is not a good sign. So looking at that, 3 of the 4 connections were actually free from the board. So what I did to fix it was just put it back in a position and then tack it down with a soldering iron. And you can see that after I soldered it back on, I've got a nice bulb on the top of that because I put a little extra solder to sort of add adhesion, if you will, to keep that switch in place. Now, to be fair, had I not pushed in that thing with a pen, I'd have been okay. But the reason I'm saying it's 2% DJI's fault is because any engineer will tell you, or any technician will tell you, if you've got a button that a consumer can push, especially if you're going laterally across the surface like this and I'm pushing on the end of it, you've got to backstop it with something. It either has to have a cushion behind it, it's got to be glued to the board or something to keep it from being pushed back too far. You can't trust a solder joint to hold something to the board. It's something that'll tack it to the board and make electrical connection, but anybody out there will tell you that if you use the soldered connection to sort of maintain that connection and the physicality of it binding to the board, over time that movement of that switch is going to break free and you're going to get what's called a cold solder joint. So anyway, I'm making a bigger deal out of this than it is, but I did tear it apart, soldered it in place, put it back together, booted it up, and it bound perfectly fine. Now what I find interesting here is, okay, it's Rick's fault. Rick went in there like a gorilla with a pen, jammed the thing in there and it popped loose and we're in bad shape there. Now honestly, you may never run across this problem because that button is something you're going to push maybe once or twice in the history of the quad. It's a very rare thing to have to rebind a controller. They come bound from the factory. The only time you'd want to do that is if you have to replace the controller, or maybe when they release the firmware that allows you to fly this with 2 controllers, you're going to bind the second controller. Maybe you're binding a headset if you're using the goggles, or maybe, who knows, DJI may be coming out with a really upgraded controller that we're all talking about. You'll want to bind it then. So okay, maybe 5 times you're going to hit that button. But if you hit it with a pen, you're going to pop it off. And I thought to myself, is this unique? Is this something that was just me wrestling this thing, with the pen trying to knock it loose? Or is that really a problem with DJI quads? Now, I don't want to pick on them too bad, but I thought, well, how can I verify that? Well, I got a Pro. I got a Mavic 2 Pro upstairs. So sure enough, I brought it back down to the bench, tore open the bottom exactly like I did on the Zoom. And I'm showing you a picture now of what that switch looks like when it hasn't been pushed on by a pen by Rick. It's sitting on top of those pads and it's lightly soldered to the pad as well. There's not a lot of extra solder holding that thing down. So I'm a little bit surprised from an engineering perspective that they didn't glue that with some kind of silicone or something to hold it in place. But I guess they're figuring you shouldn't be hitting with a pen, don't be a knucklehead and do that. So if you look very closely, and this is really where I got in trouble by using the pen or using a paper clip, is if you look closely on that, the way they limit your travel is that button is raised a little bit over the surface. I'm showing you a picture now. It's only up a tiny bit over that surface. So if you just gently touch it with your finger, think of like touching a baby on the nose, just a little boop, just like that, boop, just hit it a little bit, you'll reset it, no big deal. But if you get in there with a pen or you get in there with a paper clip and you start jamming it in like I did, you're going to push that hard enough where you may pop that switch off the board, then you're going to have trouble with the binding function. Now, I don't want to make this overly dramatic because if that happens, you put it in a box, you send it back to DJI and everything's fine. But what happens if you hit it and the binding works, but you've loosened that switch? Think about that scenario. Now the quad's up in the air and it's flying off into the distance, and that switch is riding with a loose connection on top of that board. The vibrations of the quad force the quad inadvertently to go into binding mode. Now I've got a quad that doesn't see the remote, it's looking for the remote, and it's somewhere far away. That's a scary position because that quad then is going to go through, hopefully, a return to home and land where it took off. But if you're low on battery or it's really far away, it may just force the landing at that point. So for me, that was kind of a ticking time bomb that I'm glad I caught. And I looked at the Mavic Pro as well, Mavic 2 Pro as well. And again, that scared me, so I tacked those solder joints down. Now, I'm not saying peel open your Mavic 2s and solder the thing in there. What I am saying is just be gentle with that button. Again, let my mistake be your cautionary tale to not do the same dumb thing I did and really pound on that button. That's all I really wanted to get across to you, because I think if you hit that thing 4 or 5 times with your finger, you're going to be perfectly fine. If you hit it 4 or 5 times with a pen or a paper clip, you're going to probably pop that switch off the board. So just be aware of that. And that's pretty much it for today. So I like putting these kind of clips together because I'm out there flying every day. I'm really putting these guys through their paces and really having a lot of fun flying. But when I come across something like that I think you guys are going to find valuable, I'll put a clip together and explain what I did, what kind of trouble I got into, and how I got out of it. So hopefully you found this clip helpful. I have a lot of fun doing these. So again, if you guys are finding value in them, I'm going to continue to produce them because I'm just really loving the hobby and loving flying these quads. So thanks an awful lot for watching. If you have any questions about this or anything else I've talked about, drop them in the comments below and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. I've got a ton more clips I'm working on, so definitely stay tuned to the channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider hitting that subscribe button down there and joining the Drone Valley family, because we just love having a lot of subscribers and really enjoy this hobby. So hopefully you guys are having fun watching these clips. And that's pretty much it for today. So until next time, happy flying.